Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. According to my screen, there's now 21 participants have joined us. There may be more coming, but I think we said we would start at 7, so we will start at 7. My name's Andrew Thinn. I'm chairman of the Scottish Land Commission, and with me, I've got 2 members of staff and another land commissioner. So I want first to let them introduce themselves. So Megan, why don't you Megan is another land commissioner. Why don't you introduce yourself first, Megan, please?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. My name is Megan Mckinnis. I'm also a Scottish Land Commissioner. I'm joining you all from Applecross, up in the Northwest Highlands, where I live as part of a crofting family. I've worked on land reform internationally for about 15 years, and it's definitely one of my key interests at the moment. So I'm very honoured to be able to be a commissioner at this important time. Thank you.
Megan, thank you very much. And Emma, I can't see your picture, but I know you're there. Emma, maybe you would introduce yourself.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Emma Cooper, and I'm the Head of Land Rights and Responsibilities for the Scottish Land Commission. So I'm tasked with putting the Scottish Government's Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement into practice. I'm calling you, speaking to you, videoing you this evening from Inverness, having recently relocated from the Isle of Bute.
Great, Emma, thank you very much indeed. And last but certainly not least is Harriet. Harriet, why don't you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Harriet Donald. I'm the Regional Land Use Partnerships Project Manager for Scottish Land Commission, and I'm in role on secondment from Loch Lomond and the Trossachs National Park Authority, where I was the Land Management Programme Manager. So I'm talking to you from Stirlingshire, and my other hat, just as a bit of background, is I'm a new entrant tenant farmer, and we run some contract farming arrangements as well. Okay, thanks.
Harriet, thanks very much indeed. So now, before all this pandemic stuff started, we ran monthly public meetings all around the countries, and the commissioners regarded that as something of particular importance in the Land Commission. So we did it come rain, come snow, whatever else. And of course we held, and some of you were probably there, we held public meetings in Aberdeenshire just as we did elsewhere. And the pandemic has nailed that for now, but just as soon as we can, we will be back on the road holding public meetings around the country. In the meantime, we're trying to do our best with computer technology. I'm probably one of the worst people to try and do that because I'm not great at this. But we've got some great people with us who are very good at making this work. So I hope you will find it satisfactory. We're now up to 28 participants in this meeting, and we will do our level best to make it work effectively. The point of these public meetings is twofold. It is, I think, important that we get out and tell people what we're trying to do and why and so on and so forth. So we're going to do that, or rather Megan is going to do that for us. But it is also important that we get out and listen to what people have to say, what's bothering people about land in their particular part of the country, which is why we travel a lot, or used to travel a lot, and why these virtual meetings are still having a regional flavour to them, because we need to understand that land challenges and land reform challenges are not the same in all parts of Scotland. They vary very significantly, for example, between urban and rural, or between north and south, or indeed east and west. So we need to hear from you, and we want to hear from you, and this meeting will therefore go on, if necessary, until 8:30, so we can hear from as many as you as possible. And last but not least, we're here to be held to account. People raise their eyebrows when I say that, but we are public servants, and therefore it is your opportunity to hold us to account and tell us what you think about what we are or are not doing. So please do so. We'll do our best to respond. We'll do our best to listen. Okay, just one or two wee housekeeping things, and then I'm going to pass to Megan. First of all, this webinar is being recorded, and that means you'll be able to access it later if you want, and we'll also be able to access it later. As I've said, we will finish no later than 8:30. You're welcome to keep your videos on. It's good to see so many pictures. If you are in an area with limited internet, you may find that the thing works better if you take your picture off. When Megan has finished talking about our work, which will take about 15 minutes or so, I think, Megan, then we want to listen to you. In order to participate, please use the raise your hand function, which you should be able to find it at the bottom of your screen. If you cannot find it, you can use the chat thing, and we'll try and coordinate through that as well. It's not easy doing, unlike a public meeting where people can just raise their hands and we can see what's happening. This isn't easy, but we will do our best. Afterwards, we would really love further feedback. So don't see this as a sort of time-limited option. There is an email address which we'll give you. In fact, it's on the screen at the moment, I think, which you can use at any time you like to contact us, tell us what you think, ask us questions, and there will be a survey as well after this. So I think that's quite enough from me, actually, but thank you again. I'm now going to hand over to Megan, who is going to give you a gallop or a whistle-top tour. I don't know what term you want me to use, Megan, but a very, very rapid run through what is actually a very big program of work. Over to you, Megan. Hey, Megan, you're mute. You're off now.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sorry.
Yep.
I can't unmute myself while I'm sharing the screen. Thanks, everyone, again. So I'm just going to give a quick run through of an introduction to who the Scottish Land Commission is, what we've done since we were established in 2017, and what our priorities are going to be for the coming years. To start off, I want to talk a little bit about what is land reform and is it still relevant given that we had a Land Reform Act in 2016. From the Scottish Land Commission's perspective, and one of the things I hope to do this evening is to convince you all of this as well, land reform is absolutely still relevant. It has never been a one-off event. It is a continuous process of changing the statutes and the regulations and the policies and the behaviours relating to land across Scotland. I want to start just by illustrating this with these two photos. The first photo is what's known as the old Tesco site, which is located in the centre of Forest. About 6 years ago, Tesco moved their supermarket to the outskirts of Forest, leaving this site empty. It could have been converted into affordable housing. It could have been turned into a green space, a play park, allotments, into a new hotel, but instead of which it's sat here vacant and has become a real blight in the centre of Forest, a place now where there's lots of antisocial behaviour happening and where people are dumping rubbish. This site is not unique. There are 11,000 hectares of vacant and derelict land across Scotland, and that figure has remained about the same since the 1990s. I know, having looked at the Vacant and Derelict Land Register for Scotland, that there's about 100 sites in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire which are vacant and derelict, covering more than 300 hectares. So I'm sure all of you are aware just how important tackling these sites are. The second photo I want you to imagine is on an island, a small island, which is entirely owned by one family who live far away, only visit a couple of times a year. The residents on the island are facing some really significant challenges. Local families aren't able to stay on the island because there's not enough land being made available by the owners to provide affordable housing. Local businesses are unable to expand because they can't access land. The local hotel can't easily hire staff because there's no accommodation for staff because of the lack of availability of land. The tenant farmers' housing stock is being left to degrade into uninhabitable buildings, and their infrastructure is also completely inadequate for farming operations. The community on the island have tried again and again to speak to the landowners, but so far their cries of help have been unheard, and they're very worried for their future because the population is declining significantly. Both of these two examples, and I could have chosen any from any number of cases from across Scotland, to illustrate why land reform is an ongoing process and still very urgent across Scotland. It not only contributes to families being able to access affordable housing, us being able to use vacant and derelict sites more productively, or tenant farmers being able to actively and successfully operate within the agricultural sector. Land reform is also critical to wider Scottish Government objectives around the climate emergency, around the recovery and renewal after the COVID pandemic, around town centre regeneration, and also rural repopulation, and a whole range of broader targets. So this is why we believe land reform is essential, and why we hope to convince you all of this and everyone else as we carry on these public meetings. So who are the Land Commission? We were established in 2017 by the Scottish Parliament to advise on land reform across Scotland. We are 5 land commissioners and 1 tenant farming commissioner, and we've got 17 amazing staff who under normal circumstances are based in our office in Inverness. Now, before I get into the detail of our activities, I want to just explain some broad changes which have a significant impact on our work and land reform, which have happened since the introduction of the 2016 Land Reform Act, because these changes have underpinned our approach and our work. The first is that the 2016 Act rebalanced how we consider property rights in comparison to wider human rights, particularly the economic, social and cultural rights. Property rights used to be perceived as a means of withholding or holding back land reform, whereas now Scotland is moving in line with the rest of the world in recognising that human rights are a springboard for achieving land reform, and likewise land reform can be a means of fulfilling our human rights obligations. The most specific way in which the government is now articulating this is in their Scottish Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement, which is a new government policy which was published in September 2017. So this statement recognises that along with rights to land come responsibilities to your neighbours, to your local community, and also responsibilities to the wider public. And these responsibilities are now obligations on all landowners, all different types of landowners, and those that own and use and manage land. And it's these 2 changes in how we think about the balance between property rights and land reform, and think about the rights to land and the responsibilities that come with that, which underpin a lot of what I'm going to talk about now in terms of the activities we're doing. So I'm going to start just by giving you an overview of what we've been doing in the last 3 years since we were established. Starting at the top, we were asked at the very beginning of our establishment by the government to look further into the impacts of the scale and concentration of land ownership in Scotland. Scotland has one of the highest concentrated patterns of private land ownership, at least in Europe, and we published the results of that study and some recommendations both for statutory and voluntary measures in April 2019. We're going to be publishing some more detailed options for legislative reforms to deal with those problems in the next couple of months. We also, as I have mentioned already with the Forres old Tesco site, have been looking at the problem of vacant and derelict land. These 11,000 hectares of land across Scotland are a significant blight on the local communities. It's a problem which disproportionately affects our most deprived communities. It's also a major missed opportunity in terms of how that land could be used more productively. So together with the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, we launched the Vacant and Derelict Land Task Force, which has brought national attention to the issue. Connected to this work is work we've been doing looking at the way that land value sharing or land value capture can be a means to help local authorities gain from the uplift in land value, which result from public investment in a particular site, for example, through a site receiving planning permission or investments in infrastructure. Again, we have also been looking at the way in which the land market works in terms of making land available for housing and for development projects. We're aware that there are some fundamental problems in the way that land is not easily being made available for affordable housing in rural and urban areas. This is a problem which has only been exacerbated by the changes in terms of how we live and work as a result of the pandemic. And we've been publishing a series of pieces of research and analysis and recommendations about this over the summer that will all be published. That piece of work will finish in the next couple of months, and we're going to be publishing the final culmination of all of that in January. Our good practice programme is the work that Emma is responsible for, which is looking at the implementation of the Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement. We've been issuing protocols which outline landowners and communities' obligations in relation to the implementation of that statement, as well as providing training and helping landowners in specific cases where they have questions or issues they'd like some advice and support with. One of the most recent pieces of work that we've published, which Harriet has been leading on, and it's great to have her on this webinar to answer your questions, are the regional land use partnerships. This was another piece of work that we were asked to work on by the government. It builds on the two pilot regional land use partnerships, which were implemented as a result of the Climate Change Act and also the land use strategy. And our advice on partnerships, on how to implement partnerships, now looks at how you could roll out that model across Scotland, thinking not only about the resources that are needed, but also how that would be done. We're recommending starting with planning authorities, looking also at governance and participation, and the kind of targets that the partnerships would need to start working towards, both in terms of land reform, as well as our climate change targets. And then last but not least is the work of the Tenant Farming Commissioner, who's being tasked with improving relationships between tenant farmers and landowners. I'm going to speak about his role at the end of this presentation. So this is what we've been working on for the last 3 years, and I'm now going to speak a little bit about what our priorities will be for the next 3 years. We've just launched a new strategic plan from 2020 to 2023. We have 3 priority areas in this new plan: reforming land rights, which looks at how land is owned and used; responsible land ownership and use, which looks at, again, the responsibilities associated with that land ownership and use; and reforming land markets, which looks at the way that land is transferred, the way it's developed, and the way it's used productively. I'm going to just say a little bit about each of these now. So the first of our work streams is reforming land rights, which aims to reform the way land rights and ownership are controlled to drive economic, social, and environmental value, strengthen community resilience, and reduce inequalities. This has a number of components to it. One is around encouraging a more diverse pattern of land ownership, which is the outcome of our work to tackle the problem of concentrated land ownership. We're also identifying new governance models to widen the range of people who can benefit from land. This, for example, includes our work with local authorities on how can we derive greater public benefit from common good land and assets, and also our work on community land and asset ownership. As I explained already, the way in which we can find a fairer balance between property rights and human rights, particularly economic, social, and cultural rights, continues to be a key area of work for us. The second work stream's around accountability and responsibility, which looks at whoever is the owner of a piece of land, that they are owning it in a way which is accountable and responsible to the local community and also to the wider public benefit that can be derived from that piece of land. So within this work stream is our good practice programme. So we have established an advisory group, which is made up of membership organisations, for example, NFUS, Scottish Lands and Estates, DTAS, Community Land Scotland, and other bodies who help us, who help guide our work in this. We're going to continue to publish protocols and guidance, and also work with landowners and other organisations and communities on the ground in the implementation of this statement. We're also going to be working more closely with local authorities about how the statement can be implemented within public policy programmes, and also with the private sector in terms of how to integrate the statement into responsible business conduct policies. We're also going to be working with the government to review a series of related policy frameworks, all of which are working towards responsible land ownership and use. So this includes the Land Rights and Responsibility Statement, the Land Use Strategy, and the guidance on community engagement in decision-making in relation to land. So we're going to be looking at how these 3 frameworks have been implemented and if it's time for them to be revised in any way. The role of the Tenant Farming Commissioner is, of course, also looking at responsible land ownership and use within the broader benefits of a better functioning system of agricultural tenure. And I'm going to speak about a bit about this later, but we're trying to look at what can be learnt from the success of the Tenant Farming Commissioner role and brought across into our Good Practice programme and wider work looking at responsible land ownership and use. And then the third of our work stream is reforming land markets, and this aims to improve the efficiency and equity of land markets to support a fair and productive economy. From the beginning of our work, we've had to focus on land valuation, and there continues to be big questions about how our land is valued and how we can better and more fairly share the benefits from increases in land value. Across the UK, our land values have increased by more than 450% since the 1990s. This is significantly outstripping the increase in value of the assets on that land, and this is leading many different groups and organisations and different parts of government to ask what it is we can do to better and more fairly distribute that increase in land value. So this is work we're going to continue to do, looking at the factors that can influence land value, and also looking at, for example, the impact of our shift to a net zero economy and a net zero society and what impact that might have on land values. We're also looking at what changes need to be made to the tax and fiscal systems to support our land reform aims. We've already published research on land value tax, and we're going to be expanding to look at a wider range of different tax systems. For example, at the moment, there's quite a lot of concern that the shift to home working and remote working is going to create a new legacy of vacant properties, vacant office spaces in urban areas. So we're looking at what kind of tax measures could be employed to help stop that happening. And we're also looking at some more practical options for reforming land markets to ensure that land is better used in the public interest. This will include the ongoing work we're going to look at in terms of the relationship between land availability and affordable housing, but also what can help make larger scale developments deliver better in terms of public benefit and enable local authorities and the public to work with developers in delivering these kind of projects. So I'm going to finish just by saying a couple of words about our Tenant Farming Commissioner, who is Bob McIntosh, and his role is to improve relations between tenant farmers and landowners. So Bob and the team have been publishing a series of codes of practice and guidance notes and dealing with alleged breaches in terms of the implementation of those codes. He's been undertaking a number of pieces of research and analysis about the tenant farming sector. For example, working with the barriers that new entrants and young farmers particularly face getting involved in the sector. For example, last year we co-launched the land matching service with the Scottish Government, as well as doing some work now on business incubator models, which can help young enterprising farmers find a space where they can experiment and test their new ideas, which is going to at a lower risk and lower cost, in a low risk and low cost context. The government undertook a review of the Tenant Farming Commissioner earlier on this year, and it concluded that the work of the Tenant Farming Commission is by far overachieving in terms of what it was expected to do in this period, and also made recommendations that it should be considered to expand both the power and the remit of this function. And it's because of the success of the review and the success of that role more generally that we're looking at what we can learn and adapt from the role of the Tenant Farming Commissioner and bring it across into other parts of the organisation, particularly in terms of the Good Practice programme and the protocols we are publishing, which help landowners and other stakeholders understand their new obligations in terms of the Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement. So thank you very much for listening. I hope this has given you a bit of an understanding of what it is we're doing and what we are planning to do in the next 3 years. I have to just echo Andrew's point that one of my favourite parts of being a land commissioner was being able to travel around the country every couple of months and hold public meetings and hear about what's happening on the ground and have some fascinating conversations. And I've been really missing that since we've had to pause that work for the last 8 months. So it's fantastic to be able to at least visit you all virtually, and I'm looking forward to your questions and comments. So I'm going to hand back to Andrew now. Thank you.
Megan, thank you very much indeed. That was a very rapid gallop through what has been a pretty busy 2 or 3 years, and we have done a lot, and there's an awful lot more coming. Questions, observations, thoughts, comments of any kind at all. We've got about an hour. Jess is going to, because I can't quite see what's happening on the screen, Jess is going to keep track of who's got their hand up and invite you to speak. So Jess, do you want to bring the first, either the first speaker, or if it's an emailed or chat box question, maybe you could read it out.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, we're going to start tonight with our first question that actually came in by email ahead of time, and it is from an anonymous asker who's asking what our plans are for radical land reform and what our timescale is to achieve it. So I think perhaps the first thing is maybe bottom out what they would define as radical in terms of land reform.
Well, Jess, thanks. And great. I think that perhaps before I ask others to speak, can I just emphasize what Megan said at the beginning of her presentation? The Land Commission has been set up by Parliament to provide advice. The Land Commission has not been set up to implement legislative change or anything like that. We have no democratic mandate to do that. Parliament has that. So questions about when or how will legislative change take place are not questions we can answer. They depend on elected representatives, and therefore they depend on, in many ways, the results of the next election in May. We have done a huge amount of work preparing advice on all sorts of things, and we've done so in response to requests from government. So we fully expect that there will be implementation in the next Parliament, but we have no real insight to that. I think, therefore, what we could usefully talk about is some of the non-statutory work that we do, which you may, of course, consider not to be particularly radical, because by definition it doesn't involve legislative change. So I'm going to pass to Emma. Emma, could you just give us a sort of thumbnail sketch of the sort of non-statutory work that we're already doing and what we hope to achieve with it, please?
Sure, thanks, Andrew. We have published this year a number of protocols, and the protocols outline expectations for landowners and communities. And they tell you really clearly, hopefully really clearly, what it is that we're looking for in terms of behaviours and actions that people can undertake. And we could say in a way that it is pretty radical, because the Land Rights and Responsibility Statement that the Scottish Government produced was the first in the world, I believe, document like that, bringing together human rights and land rights and responsibilities in that way. Now, we work through the protocols with communities and landowners all over Scotland, and we've been getting busier and busier over time, which is fantastic. And people come to us either for advice or support or guidance, or because they're having an issue between a landowner and a community. And sometimes it's landowners that come to us, sometimes it's communities that come to us, but either way, we help people to find their own solutions that work for them in their context, but really following those principles that are set out in the Land Rights and Responsibility Statement. I'll pass you back to Andrew. Oh, Megan.
Emma, thanks. Let's hear from Megan, and then I think also I'd quite like to hear from Harriet after Megan. Harriet, I'll come to you, if you don't mind, afterwards to talk about land use partnerships. It's another area where we'll drive change without parliamentary intervention. Megan.
Thanks, Andrew. I mean, one of the things I just wanted to do was reiterate what I said already in terms of the major change that happened as a result of the 2016 Act in terms of this rebalancing between property rights and human rights, because it was the perception that property rights were holding back land reform, which was hindering a lot of progress. And I think that Act over the long run will be seen as a very, very important milestone in terms of Scotland's land reform progress, because once we have a much better and fairer balance between those two, the property rights and the broader human rights framework, it provides us and everyone involved with the underpinning and the confidence to move forward on a more progressive approach. Thanks.
Thanks, Megan. Let's just hear a wee bit from Harriet, just briefly, Harriet, but a quick synopsis of the land use partnership work you've done, because that is, as I say, is again non-statutory, but it should drive change.
Okay, I'll try and keep it brief, but essentially we have a situation at the moment where land use decision making and prioritisation of what happens on holdings is almost made at an individual land holding level. And then we also have that situation balanced with delivery of funding, public funding, and decisions and prioritisation on that made at a sort of national level. So the work we've done on regional land use partnerships is looking at what we've just described as a step change in that decision-making process to try and bring, we have made recommendations on partnerships that will take a collaborative approach to that decision-making. So that will involve board structures and communities feeding in to make the decisions and to come up with a land use framework at a regional level to then drive some land use change to essentially deliver on climate change targets. So that's it in a nutshell, but I could, yeah, I'm happy
Thanks,
to
Harriet.
take more questions.
Yeah, we'll pick that up in further questions. Just to round that one off, I don't know who asked the question, so I'm not quite sure what's behind it. But what I know is that every public meeting I have ever attended consists of a vast spectrum of views on whether land reform is sufficiently radical or too radical or anything else. And there is always someone there who thinks that our work and the work of the Scottish Government is timid and pathetic and far too slow. And there is always someone there who thinks that our work and the work of the Scottish Government is outrageously radical. I was accused of being a communist at one of them. Not necessarily an accusation, but I was certainly, I was told I was a communist. I was also told that the Land Commission was leading a Mugabe-style land grab. So there are a range of views here. And our job is to stand right above that, look at what needs to be done for the benefit of all the people of Scotland, and give very clear advice to government. And that's what we're trying to do. Jess, maybe we could go to another question if that's possible, please.
Sure, and just a wee side note, it looks like there is an issue this evening with the raise hand function. So as you're all doing, please continue to send your questions in via the chat box and we'll get them read out for you. We've had the first one in a few minutes ago from Brian Allen, who said he's concerned about the selling off of small parcels of forest via the woodlands.co.uk website. And he asks, is this landowners divesting land because they fear what land reforms the Scottish Government may bring in?
I'm not sure if we know the answer to that. I'm going to ask Emma first if she knows anything about this. Emma, do you know anything about this?
Sorry.
No. I mean, let me just answer it in the general way, unless either Harriet or Megan has some insights to offer. No, there is no doubt that a very small number of landowners believe that the direction of travel in Scotland in our work is simply so radical that they'd rather not be landowners at all. They are very, very few and far between. There is still a very strong demand for land in Scotland, and you just need to look at the price that land is changing hand to tell you that. The market's telling you that. So I don't think there's much evidence that either the work of the Land Commission or the policies of the Scottish Government is having a significant impact in terms of provoking sales. There may be other reasons, and I'm sorry, I simply don't know the answer to that. Jess, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to come back to you for another question.
She is asking us tonight, how much influence are the regional land use partnerships going to have on future agricultural and rural payments? So I think that's one for you, Harriet.
Great, thank you. So Harriet, insofar as you know the answer to that, and we don't, of course, we are advising government, we're not deciding things here. Maybe you could, perhaps you could indeed give a wee bit of context to and explain, what our job is here and what government's job is and so on as part of your answer.
Yep, so we were asked, I think back at the end of last year, to work with stakeholders, and sort of the overall ask of us was to make recommendations to government on how regional land use partnerships could be established. So that is how what their functions, what their role could be, what their governance structure would be, what their geographical basis would be, and what we recommended could be rolled out. So we've worked across these topics over the last few months, and I guess to go back to sort of the question on the influence on future agricultural rural payments, one of our key recommendations that we have made is that the partnerships need to actually deliver on the ground. So we're not recommending for partnerships to be a group of people coming together, having a huge amount of conversation and essentially creating a document that maybe sits on a shelf. We want these partnerships to actually have the ability to drive land use change on the ground and deliver action. So in answer to your question, we are recommending that the partnerships have the ability to deliver funding, and therefore they will need to have a role in being allocated funding to then deliver in that local region. So they will have some role in the distribution of future subsidy and rural support schemes.
Thanks, Harriet.
That's our recommendation. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's our recommendation. We don't know what government will do, of course. Harriet, I wonder if there's a follow-on question on the chat. I'm just going to go straight to this, Jess, if you don't mind, which is from Isabel Davison, a councillor in Aberdeenshire, asking where are the regional partnerships and what work do they do with councils? Well, they're not, other than some pilots, which I think predated our work. Our recommendations have only just gone to government. Can you just say a wee bit for Isabel and indeed anybody else on how you see the timescales of all this, Harriet, as far as you know, but of course we don't know.
Yep. So the recommendations we've made is that there will be early adopters in place in 2021, and this will sort of test some of the recommendations that we've made, with the rollout of the partnerships to happen 2023-24 across the whole of Scotland. Again, the recommendations we've made are that they are based on council areas, so that there is a potential role for councils in terms of, we have made recommendations for there to be accountable bodies, although we haven't specifically said that should be local councils. So there is a team now in Scottish Government working on this, and they will be picking up our recommendations and hopefully starting to roll out some of the early adopters.
Thanks, Harriet, very much. Jess, I can actually see the questions coming in, so I'm not sure whether you want me to just take them off the feed, or why don't you tell me the next question, but I may just start taking them off the group chat.
Okay, well, the next one that had come in was from Bill Lang, who's asking, how significant is the Commission in shaping land reform policy, and how much input will we have?
Great, so thanks, Bill. I'm going to kick that off and then go to Megan, I think, if that's okay, Megan. So the Commission was set up by the Scottish Parliament, but very much supported by Scottish Government itself, to advise government on land reform legislation and land reform policy. So it wouldn't have been set up if it wasn't going to have a significant influence. That was the intention, and therefore, and as things stand at the moment, we have a very close relationship with the government. We have a great deal of dialogue backwards and forwards. They have asked us to do a number of pieces of work. Harriet's just referred to the fact that we were asked to do the land use partnership work, for example. Other pieces of work, we have said that the thinking's originated with us. So at the moment, I think we will be highly significant in shaping land reform policy. We do need to recognise that this sits within a much wider context, and of course COVID has knocked a lot of things sideways, including this, and we like any intelligent advisor and thoughtful and aware advisor, we'll be constantly adjusting what we're thinking and what we're working on and what we're saying to reflect that wider context. But I certainly expect us to be pretty influential. Megan, you maybe want to add a wee bit on that, do
you? Only just to say, Andrew, I mean, I think you've answered that very comprehensively. The only additional thing I would say is that part of the thinking behind the creation of the Land Commission in the long run was that historically the Scottish Government has, and the Scottish Parliament have had periods where they've been very focused on land reform and periods where it hadn't been a priority, and as that had had a very detrimental effect on the way in which land reform was being implemented on the ground. So one of the reasons for creating the Land Commission was to have a consistent public body which was responsible for advising and driving land reform over the long period to keep that consistency, and also to start thinking and looking at what the impact of some of the land reform measures were on the ground that we were recommending, which is why we're now, as we move into our second strategic plan, we're now in a phase where we're in a place where we can actually start looking at the implementation of, for example, the land rights responsibility statement and the land use strategy as it's time for them to be revised. So I think that I think we are, I would agree with Andrew, I think we are being very influential, but I think the influence isn't just simply about shaping the proposals, but it's also about having the long-term view and looking at the impact and making then suggested potential revisions to how it's working, so that we're actually making sure that the land reform has the intended impact on the ground. Thanks.
Megan, thanks. Emma, Harriet, probably not want to say anything more on that. Jess, if it's okay, I'm just going to follow the feed, but butt in if you think I'm missing something. Do we maintain a list of consultation involved? And from Jennifer Biggs, thanks, Jennifer. So all our work is published extensively on our website. It's a great website, and there's masses and masses there. So that's your first port of call. If you've got a specific question, can you email us, please, on the email address that's well, it was on the screen and will come up again, and we'll do our best to respond if it's something that's not on the website. From Carolyn Birch, can you expand a little on your work on how to tax land value gains more fairly? So just to be clear, the tax work is mostly work we're going to do going forward. So we can't answer in detail our thinking there because it's quite early on. But first of all, we did do some work on some quite important work on land value sharing in relation to planning uplift. I wonder, Megan, you might be the best person, would you, to say briefly a bit about the work we did on that, and then I'll maybe come to you, Emma, just for some thoughts on where we might go with tax. But it's very, very early days. We haven't started planning that to any great extent.
Yes, I'm happy to do that. It was hard to encapsulate all of the 3 years' work into one screen. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's important. The land value, the taxation focus work had looked at land value tax. The land value sharing is a separate piece of work, and that looked at, as I said, what could be done to ensure that local authorities who are currently facing quite significant budget cuts, what can we do to ensure that they are able to gain some of the uplift in the value of land that results from public investment and public, for example, planning permission in a particular piece of land. We looked at essentially mechanisms which could help the local authority and developers both share the benefits as well as share the risks in terms of bringing forward a piece of land for bringing forward development projects on a piece of land. And this is intended to help tackle one of the problems which is known as land banking, where developers are buying a piece of land and not actually bringing it forward for development use, but also a measure that's intended to help make sure that we are using all of our land more productively and at its most productive use. And that, again, this can help to enable local authorities to have more budgets more resources they can draw on for bringing forward other infrastructure projects within their area.
And Emma, do you want to? I'm sorry, I'm asking you to look at a crystal ball, but if you've no insights, just say so. But I thought I'd give you the chance.
Thanks, Andrew. I'll just briefly add that we know that there are different ways of doing this in other countries, and quite a lot of the Commission's research previously has looked at examples from elsewhere to see what's working, how it works, and I expect that will be part of the tax work going forward as well. But as Andrew says, extremely early days on that one, so we'll update people as we know more.
Thanks, Emma. I'm going to take Neil McGregor's question about, it's a statement, but it's a question as well, really, about community ownership in 2 seconds. But I just want to deal with Gwen Chalmers' point about the land use partnerships. So as farmers and crofters are the custodians of the countryside, will there be guaranteed places on the regional Partnerships, I'm going to come to you, Harriet. Let's just be clear, we are not the decision makers here. We've given some advice to government. It's for government to decide what to happen. But I think it'd be helpful to hear from Harriet, what, as a farmer herself, what was your advice, Harriet?
So the recommendation we have made is for a partnership board of 10 to 12 individuals serving fixed terms, and these will be drawn from what we've called 3 pools of expertise. So there will be public body government individuals, and then there will be individuals with relevant sector expertise, and then there will be community individuals. So I guess in terms of the farmers and crofters question, these will they could fall into either any of those 3, but the sort of probably the middle group in terms of the individual sectoral expertise would be where that will ensure some of that sort of sector representation. But I should make clear in the recommendations we've made, it's on a skills matrix basis. So we are not asking individuals to come forward just representing a sector. The individuals will be recruited based on the skills that they can offer to a board. And we are looking for that range of skills on a partnership board.
Thanks, Harriet. So that's our advice. What government does, of course, we do not know. And I'm sorry, Gwen, we can't answer for government here. But what is absolutely clear and unambiguous, I think, from Harriet's answer is that farming skills and crofting skills will be on those partnerships, but they'll be there on the basis that they're bringing skills in farming, skills in crofting, knowledge of farming, and not to represent a particular interest group. Otherwise, a representative body would look somewhat different. Great, thank you. I'm going to come back now, please, to, sorry, just let me get to Bill's, to Neil McGregor, sorry. So Neil's making a statement, but I think it opens up an interesting area of work that we've done an awful lot of work in this area. So the statement he makes is, there was an item on Radio 4 Open Country about 3 community buyouts on Duke of Buccleuch's estate, and the tenants sounded very positive about the relationship with the landlord, but absolutely certain that through ownership, they could create a better future for their community. Now, there are communities all over Scotland, in urban Scotland and in rural Scotland, from top to bottom, who have come to the view that they would better owning the land themselves than having it in either private or public hands. So communities have taken over from government owners, Forestry Commission and so on, just as much as from private owners. And I think there are examples of taking over from charitable owners. I'm not, yes, there are. I can think of at least one near Ullapool where land was taken over by the community from the RSPB. So Megan, maybe you could start. Megan lives in Applecross and can offer sort of just a wide-ranging thought about the work we've done. Some pretty important work on community ownership, but maybe just set the scene a wee bit more for people in terms of, you know, why is this important? Why is it been a government priority?
Thanks, Andrew. I mean, I think it's the example in the comment is I think actually quite usual in terms of the relationship between local communities and landowners. There is, from the perspective of local communities, and having grown up on the Isle of Skye and now living in Applecross, I'm sort of familiar with a number of different communities who own a range of different scales of assets, you know, both either the, you know, large estates or down to very small assets that are part of a larger piece of land which might be owned by someone else. It's pretty clear that from the community's perspective there are huge benefits that can be derived from becoming the owners of the piece of land. That the key benefit is about being able to ultimately be in control of the decision making about what happens to that land and that asset, and being able to then use that asset as a means to develop according to the community's vision for that particular area. And that's true for whether or not you have a community like Knoydart or Egg who have bought a very large piece of land, as much as it is true for a community like mine, where the local community development company is owning much smaller pieces of land which have a very particular purpose: public toilets, fuel station, and now a piece of land for constructing affordable houses on. I think that one of the misconceptions about community land ownership is that it's done in a context of of an antagonistic relationship between a landowner and a community, because the antagonistic cases are the ones that have got the headlines, you know, Egg and there's a few others, and that's it. But that, in my experience, doesn't actually represent the normal pattern through which a community goes through a very positive and sometimes difficult, but ultimately satisfactory and mutually beneficial negotiated transfer of the land from a landowner into community land ownership, or an asset into community asset ownership. And I think that it's been really interesting because since the COVID pandemic, there's been so much focus on the importance of not just green space and people's access to good quality green space nearby where they live, but also the idea of community resilience and the importance of communities having organizations and structures which they can use to support each other and provide local services and take on the kind of support and additional activities which are required by emergencies such as the pandemic, with the expectation that, you know, we might see more of these in the future. And there's been some really interesting work done both around the way in which community land ownership organizations were very well able to step into the breach created by the pandemic in terms of providing support to local communities, because they had those structures in place and they knew the community members, they knew who was vulnerable, they knew who needed help. And so there's some research done there by Community Land Scotland and the Community Woodlands Association, which has documented that in a really, really clear way in terms of the much broader benefits that community land ownership can have. I also want to just reflect on the fact that similar studies have been looking at the relationship between land ownership, tenure security, land rights, and the response to the pandemic internationally. And they've focused on the fact that a core part of a community being able to be resilient is the fact that they're able to control some of the decisions around the community that impact on that community. And you can't really control what's happening in your community if you can't control your security of your land and your resources. And so there's a lot of international work which has also looked at the fact that communities who have secure tenure around land and resources, communities who own their land, are in a much better position to be able to respond to this pandemic, the climate emergency, and other future crises. And this is therefore something that we all need to start working towards in terms of making sure that communities are able to work towards that and to be able to influence decision making, and that community land ownership is one of the key ways of doing that here in Scotland.
Great, Megan, thank you. Emma, Emma's a great thinker on this subject, and so I really would like to hear from you, Emma, not just about community ownership, but can you just link it to the whole business of community empowerment in land issues? You haven't got an hour and a half. You've got 5.
I was going to say, that's a dissertation kind of question, isn't it?
It is. Well, you've got a platform. Go for it.
Okay, so just briefly then, I'll touch on the point about good positive relationships between landlords and tenants, and landlords and communities. We really encourage this negotiated transfer, and that might be a transfer of ownership, or it might be different ways of working together to achieve what communities and landowners are seeking to achieve. So we specifically ask that landowners proactively review their land holdings, think about where they could work with other people to achieve their aims and the community's aims. We ask them to respond positively and in a timely manner to any inquiries about transfers or different kind of uses of land that people might want to undertake. That could be community groups, it could be businesses. And we ask the landowners to be transparent about their decision making as well. And that really enables people to have a more open and honest dialogue about what they all want to achieve. And we found that that's really the most effective way of maintaining good relationships, but also getting out of the process what everybody is really looking for. On that wider question of ownership and empowerment, many of you and many people I know have lived in places where landlords, landowners can make lives challenging for communities, not deliberately by any means, just by not being there to have a chat with, not being somebody that they can have a conversation with and solve problems with and challenges. So this is really about making those dialogues really effective for everybody involved. I'll leave it there. Thanks, Andrew.
Emma, thank you. And I know you could have talked much longer. This is a big subject. Neil, thanks for your question, or thanks for your comment. I'm glad you raised that. Let's just remember that community ownership of land is pretty much normal in a large part of Europe, and Scotland is abnormal by having relatively little community ownership. We are so in many ways what's happening at the moment is a normalization of Scotland. The interesting thing going forward, I think, is what there are different ways in which communities can own land. At the moment, it tends to be either the community owns it or it doesn't. But there are hybrid options, and there's one being explored at the moment down in the borders in one of the buyouts from Buccleuch, where possibly part of the funding comes from another party who then has an influence in it. And I don't actually see why there shouldn't be hybrids where the community and a private landowner have a share, a 50-50 interest in land. You see that in Norway. You see it in common grazings, actually, in the Crofton Counties, one of the few examples in this country. So great scope there. Let's move on. Bill Lang. Bill, thanks. If we had a government of a different hue, e.g. more right-wing, but it could presumably any hue, that might spell the end of the Commission. Can you safeguard your work? I'm going to deal with this and then come to the others if they want to add to anything. I mean, just the facts first. I mean, we were set up by Parliament, and therefore we can only be disbanded by Parliament. So there would have to be legislation to disband us. But of course, we are very largely funded by government, and government can decide not to do that, which would have much the same effect. So you're right, it is possible that a government could decide that they didn't want us, and that's, in a sense, that's right, because this is a democracy, and if we are not delivering what our democratically elected representatives think we should be doing, or they need, or they want, then it's right that they should have that power. So in that sense, we don't have some power to stop government doing that or stop Parliament, and nor should we. We're not elected. But I want to broaden this. I do not think that, in many ways, our work is not about right or left politics. If you look at our work on large-scale landholdings and concentrated landholdings, which we've published some initial advice on already, and we'll publish some more, I hope, in January. And the board, in fact, is meeting shortly to consider its thinking on that further. That is about monopolism and monopoly powers. It's about liberal economic theory, actually. It's not, I think, in any sense necessarily about right and left. One could argue that some of the advice that we've given on community ownership and empowerment is quite Thatcherite. I could argue that. So let's not see this in terms of left and right. Let's see it in terms of what can we do to make more of Scotland's land for the benefit of all of Scotland's people, whatever the circumstances may be, pandemic or whatever. That's been our focus. It's not ideological, and I think it shouldn't be ideological. It should be practically driven. It should be very much about that. We need to live in a country where we are as productive as possible, where our economy is growing, where we all have good lives, access to green space, good mental health, all these sorts of things. They're all quite straightforward things, and I don't think they're uniquely of the left or the right or any other place. Megan, Emma, Harriet, do you want to add anything? I've lost Harriet's picture, but do you want to add anything? No. Okay, Bill, thanks. A good, helpful question, because people do worry about that and ask us a lot about that, and we try and make the point that it's not as sort of starkly political as is often claimed. Let's move on. Brian Allen. Brian, thanks. Is the work of Leslie Riddick around hatting on your radar? I mean, the short answer is absolutely, very much so, big time. And then you go on to say, I think that at the very least, a charity around community centre should have access to this to allow city folk to enjoy the outdoors, especially our youngsters. And of course, this links to community ownership and a number of other things. Emma, do you want to say, you know, not specifically about hutting if you don't want to, but do you want to say anything perhaps a bit more about this and what people could do, communities could do to enable the recreational space to be more accessible and land to be more useful and so on and so forth?
Yeah, it's a really big question, isn't it? And thoroughly agree with the point made. Everybody should have access to good quality outdoor spaces, whether that's in their community in an urban area, or whether that's being able to reach out to some of Scotland's more rural and wonderful places. And that access to recreational spaces has been a key, in terms of the right to roam, has been a key step forward for Scotland, which isn't enjoyed in many other countries, and a really important one. So in terms of people being able to access huts and other kind of accommodation and provision, we start to get into really complicated issues around housing and access to land for all sorts of different purposes, and trying to balance that out. Yeah, I can't think what else to say on that at the moment. Yeah, big kind of a big subject, but it's also kind of distilled down into a nice concept.
Andrew, can I add something to that? Yes, we're absolutely aware of this. In fact, I spoke alongside Leslie Vidder on a panel at the 1,000 Huts campaign Hutters Rally last year. It was only last year in Dundee. And we talked very much about the relationship between hutting and land reform. It is very much on our agenda, and it is something which is absolutely become exemplified by the COVID pandemic in terms of the need for green space and for particularly city-based children to be able to access that. As I understood, some of the more practical restrictions at the moment towards hutting are around planning designations. So this is something that people are hoping that the national planning framework that's currently under revision will be able to deal with. The other thing I really emphasised during what I said at that conference was that, you know, the hutting community shouldn't just look to future legislative options. They should also explore what could be done at the moment. For example, some of the successful hutting huts that have been built have been created when you have an urban-based community working with a landowner in another area who are collaborating together to create those huts on that piece of land. And that's something that, for example, could be done if urban communities are able to think about and explore the possibilities of collaborating with community land ownership groups in other areas about the possibility of building huts on their land and for use. So I think that it is a really important issue, and I think that there's plenty that could be done at the moment to explore the possibilities of expanding the access to huts, as well as thinking about what needs to be changed in the policy frameworks in the future.
Megan, thank you, Megan, very much indeed. Harriet dropped out, but I think she's back now. Okay, let's move on to the next one. This is from Paul Davison. It's really a planning question. So it's of marginal we have marginal influence in this area, but let me just say what he's asking. So he's saying it would be helpful to have areas of vacant and derelict land identified in local development plans. That's the plans that councils produce, saying, you know, where you can build houses and so on. It would be useful to have all land in defined settlements identified by use in local development plans. At present, development plans are merely a way developers can record their right to develop housing estates and industrial estates on land formerly used for other purposes. And once the developer's sites are registered, they're never removed, even if they're never actually developed. Could the Land Commission use local development plans as a means of conveying land use information to the public? So I'm going to answer, but I'm going to then come to Harriet to talk more generally, I think, Harriet, about, not about local development plans, but about this whole business of conveying land use information to the public. You might want to say something about that in the context of local land use partnerships, but let me just deal with the development plan point. So, I mean, first of all, what's in a development plan is partially determined by law, but it's also a matter to some extent for local authorities, and local authorities have a degree of discretion. So I'd encourage you, if this is an issue, to go and talk to your planning authority, your local authority. If it is a national issue, we do not on the whole have a remit to advise on planning reform, but we did provide some specific advice to the last planning bill in relation to land value capture, which Megan talked about earlier. I think it would be helpful perhaps offline through the email address if you wanted to just say a bit more about this, Paul, but I mean, it's not, we don't produce development plans and we don't tell local authorities what to do. We're an advisor to government. So we'd have to, I suppose we'd have to be clear, you know, what our remit was here. Harriet, if you're back on, and I can't see you.
Yes, I'm here.
Ah, brilliant, Harriet, thank you. There's a wider point which does link to the local land use partnerships, I think, which is providing the public with land use information. I wonder if you'd like to say anything about that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point around the local development plans, and I think it's the point about identifying almost the opportunities and the priorities in an area is perhaps you know, highlighting the vacant and derelict sites. So the role of the regional land use partnership is to produce a framework which does identify these opportunities and priorities for everyone in the region to access. And we also have, just to link it back to sort of the planning point, we have made the recommendation that the partnerships and the framework should integrate with what we already have in existence in terms of planning. So the regional spatial strategies that are coming into play, and also the regional economic strategies. So the partnership should look to produce this framework which almost brings all that together and identifies these options in an area. So I think it's an interesting point, and yeah, I'd be keen to hear more about sort of your thoughts. And we have made that recommendation, but it is something for government to work on in a bit more detail and examine that relationship between these different sort of spatial planning, place-based strategies.
Hi, thank you. So the point well made by the person who put the question in, Paul, thank you for that. And I think, you know, no doubt that the more we can tell people, you know, how our land is being used, and it is our land, it's a national asset, let's be clear about that. Yes, Megan, I've spotted you, I'll come to you in 2 seconds. The better. But of course, you know, all of these things involve cost and resources to local authorities and everybody else. So there is a balance. Megan, I apologise for not bringing you in earlier. You wanted to say something about this?
No, it's fine. I just wanted to add a couple of thoughts on what could be done outside of planning in these to address these kind of situations. One of the things that the Vacant and Derelict Land Task Force recommended was that there needed to be greater transparency and information available about vacant and derelict sites, and that although that there is currently the Scottish government's register of vacant and derelict land, that is I mean, I downloaded it yesterday. It's an Excel spreadsheet. It's not exactly the most modern system for data sharing, and so one of the recommendations of the task force was that there needs to be better integration of that information to other types of information within a local authority, but also at a national level, in order to improve the ability to know information about particular sites, but also connect the fact that that is a registered vacant and derelict site with other decisions being made about that site. So hopefully, once those recommendations are taken forward, we'll be able to see better sort of integration at the information level about these kind of situations. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that one of the pieces of work that we looked at a couple of years ago was powers to help enable local authorities to compulsory sale order powers, which we're focused on empowering local authorities to essentially require a landowner to take a long-term vacant or derelict site to sell that site to auction if it was proved that the landowner had had no serious intention to actually develop that site. And so that is another way, another tool that local authorities can have to deal with particular sites that they are finding problematic in terms of being able to bring forward their own development plans for a particular area.
Well, thanks. Your questions prompted all sorts of issues in our heads. Emma, I have a feeling you wanted to add something.
Yeah, just picking up on what Megan was saying about resources available for local authorities and communities. There is a growing number of them available. Some of them are on our website, and we can signpost you to other ones to look at vacant derelict land and how to address it. We recently wrote to the private owners of land on our vacant derelict land map, and we've actually signposting them to resources for addressing these issues, and we've had a tremendous response back from that. Lots of inquiries coming back to us, which has been great. And we have a programme of training and support that we'll be delivering next year to local authorities as well around these issues and other organisations.
Brilliant, thanks, Emma. And can you stay there, so to speak, because next on the chat, Emma very helpfully just flagged up that on the website there's a lot of information about, following on my point about community ownership being normal in other countries, there's some really good information about international models of ownership and so on. To many people, this term models of governance is gobbledygook. What does that mean? I think it'd be really helpful, Megan, if you could just elaborate a wee bit, because I mean, you're right, of course. In other countries, they just have different ways of owning stuff, and more kind of shared ways of owning stuff and common ways of owning stuff. And historically, even in this country, both north and south of the border, there are different ways of doing it. But could you just say a bit more about that? Because for a lot of people, that very term governance is a switch off.
Yeah, sure. So by governance, we just mean how things are kind of managed from the top. So who gets to make the decisions? So that might be that an organisation has a board of directors or a board of trustees. You'll be familiar with those, but who gets to be on that board, and who gets to be a trustee, and how does that group of people have to make decisions? What are the rules that I was going to say govern, but what are the rules that tell them how they have to make those decisions and who they have to involve in those decisions? So there's loads of different ways that we can change governance. And all sorts of different ways of doing it, already in Scotland, but also, around the world.
Great, Emma, thank you. Let's move on. So Gwen Chalmers, Gwen, thanks very much. Sort of two questions rolled into one, really. One, a very specific one about access grants available to landowners. I mean, on the whole, it is not our role to recommend how government should spend its money, and I think that would be we'd have to be very clear why we were going to do that. I mean, at the end of the day, government decides how much it raises from us, and then it decides how to spend that, and they're elected to do that. We're not. So I don't think that's something we're likely to get involved in unless it has some real implications for land reform, land ownership. I think the reality is that money is going to be incredibly short over the next few years, and government's going to be probably more focused on how do they get more of it from us than how do they spend more of it. The climate change part of your question, so it's asking about climate change options to improve the health of soils, but I think more generally, maybe Megan and maybe then also Emma and Harriet, because this is a big subject and a big priority going forward, which has been a wee bit eclipsed by the pandemic. But it's a big subject for land use partnerships and so on. Megan, first of all, just big picture stuff. Can you just link land reform to the climate challenge for us a wee bit?
How long do I have? Yeah.
2 minutes.
Well, trying not to oversimplify a massively complicated topic. From the Land Commission's perspective, and this is articulated in more detail in our new strategic plan, so I'd suggest everyone had a look at that if they're interested in this. We very much see the question of how we own, use and manage land as having huge implications in terms of Scotland meeting its climate change target and moving to a net zero economy, a net zero society. Not only in terms of the fact that there are big questions that we need to answer as a country about how we meet those climate targets in terms of what that means for land use change around, increasing tree planting, looking at peatland, looking at other types of land use partnership, looking at other types of land uses, how we deal with green infrastructure more effectively within urban areas, on those kind of things, increasing our overall ability to absorb, to sequester carbon across the country. But there is another side to this debate in terms of the fact that we need to do this, not just in terms of meeting our kind of quantitative climate targets, but we also need to do this in a way which helps Scotland become a fairer economy and a well-being focused economy. Our Cabinet Secretary, Rosanna Cunningham, talks repeatedly about the need for Scotland to have a green and fair economy, and this really is the direction that the government has chosen. And this involves making sure that we think about our climate change targets within the framework of human rights as well, and that we use the changes that are needed across our society to meet human rights objectives as well as meet our climate change objectives. And so this is called, in the jargon, a just transition, which means basically that we're making a transition to a net zero economy and a net zero society in a way which tackles inequality at the same time. It deals with highly concentrated patterns of land ownership, for example, or helps us enable steps towards increasing diversity of land ownership. And so what we're seeing land reform being able to do is to meet both of those objectives, meeting our objectives around planting trees and peatland restoration, as well as meeting the objectives around a fair society and a just society.
Great, Megan, thank you. Harriet, I can't quite remember what you said about the climate challenge, but I'm absolutely certain that it was right up there. So why don't you just link this to the land use partnerships, or indeed anything else you think that you want to say?
So I think there's probably two parts to this. The main driver behind the ask from government for us to make the recommendations on regional land use partnerships is because they're seen as sort of one of the main mechanisms to help deliver the climate change targets through land use. So that sort of collaborative land use planning, decision making and delivering landscape scale change, and across a region is really going to sort of up Scotland's efforts to meet those climate change targets. So regional land use partnerships will be sort of really key in meeting the climate change targets. But just around the point about the priorities of EECs and the desire for areas that have worked really well in the local region. So some of the recommendations that we have made for the partnerships is that they will balance national priorities for land use with also local level priorities. So if you have in, for example, one particular region, a real desire for, I'm just going to use this example of more disabled access footpaths, it could be that that region decides that is a priority for an element of funding that they deliver to spend in that way. So that is sort of part of the main role of the partnerships, is to balance both the national but with also the local level. So I'm hoping that's answered sort of both parts of your question, Gwen.
Hi, thanks. This is a huge subject which has a long way to run. Emma, do you want to peer into your crystal ball a bit on this subject?
I'll just say that we know that this is a real driver behind policy and decision making at the moment, and Megan and Harriet have outlined some ways in which you can see that. We're asking through our protocols, through the land rights and responsibility statement, for landowners to consider the long-term impact of the decisions that they make right now, and to balance their economic needs with the social needs, the environmental needs that we have, which is a huge challenge and responsibility for landowners, and one we hope and believe that we will be able to, people can achieve.
Great, thanks Emma, very much indeed. Just reminding us that on our website there is a vacant and derelict site map, so you can see. I was astonished actually to discover that there was a vacant and derelict, well, it was a derelict building actually, just near where I lived, and I actually didn't know that, so it's well worth having a look at. Right, I think we're coming to the end. People are beginning to go and get their shopping deliveries and so on, according to the chat. So that's wonderful. Just if anyone wants to offer any other thoughts or ask any other questions, please put something on the chat now. But otherwise, I think I will probably wind this up. It's been a very interesting conversation, not particularly about Aberdeen or Aberdeenshire, which is, but that's the interesting thing about doing things on the internet. We're all learning, and I find this sort of thing really valuable. Though I must admit, I'm looking forward to holding a proper public meeting in Tariff or somewhere in due course. So, okay, thank you. I think we'll call it a day there. It's getting on towards 8:30. I want to say a huge thank you. The huge amount of work behind the scenes went on to get this organized by two people whose pictures you can't see, Jess and Sarah. A huge thank you to them both. I want to also obviously say a big thank you to Harriet and Megan and Emma. Thank you very much indeed. I should say that out of the 6 Land Commission people involved in this meeting, 4 have small children around their feet, and you wouldn't know it. It's very impressive. So thank you very much for that. And of course, I want to say a huge thank you to all of you. I lost track trying to follow the counter, but we had a lot of people coming and going throughout the course of the meeting. One final thought before I log off, and is this. There is a risk, I think, that people see land reform as something that other people do, that the Land Commission does or government does. Land reform, I don't accept that. I think land reform is driven by all of us. We all have and it's a matter for all of us. It touches all of us. It affects all of us. It'll affect all of our children, all of our grandchildren. We're all voters for one thing, and there's an election next year. But more importantly, we're all participants in communities. Many of those who attend these meetings are themselves involved in community land ownership, in dialogue with local landowners, in helping tenants and all sorts of other things. So please, please, don't go away from this meeting and think, that's fine, they'll get on and do land reform, I can get on with my life. That's not, I think, how we need to see things in Scotland. We need all to see land reform as something that we drive together. Thank you very much indeed. There are up on the screen now, I hope, our contact details. If you cannot see the screen for some reason, just simply go into a search engine and put Scottish Land Commission in, and it'll all come up. Please get in touch with us. Normally after a public meeting, I love to hang around and talk to people individually about the things that they daren't say in public. Can't do that. So would you please, if you would like to contact us directly, please use the email. I'm more than happy to phone people and have a private chat. So, we are, and we pride ourselves on being a very accessible organization. So please access us. Thank you all. Good night and take care. No need to have a safe journey. You're all at home. Bye.
Sandy.
Cheers.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Well done. Well done.